You learn everything about a man when he thinks he has destroyed you. Watching my fiancé stare at his shoes while my boss fired me over a $1 billion foundation flaw, I refused to ignore. I did not shed one single tear. He leaned in and told me to go cry to my dead parents. He truly thought he had won. But revenge, like a 60-story skyscraper with rotten supports, takes exactly 0 seconds to bury you. Hello, dear listeners of Boss Revenge Stories, and thank you so much for your continued support. Recently, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the necessary budget to keep our operations running. If you find today's story engaging, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team, help them afford their daily living expenses, and keep creating these stories for you. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the video description or the pinned comment section. My name is Mila Coleman. I am 34 years old, and for the last 7 years, I was the quiet spine keeping Vanguard Pinnacle Development standing. In the ruthless skyline of Chicago, men in bespoke Italian suits take all the credit, but it is the structural engineer who carries the actual weight of the sky. I was considered a prodigy in load-bearing physics. I carried all the real technical risk for the firm. If a gleaming glass tower stood tall, the executives drank vintage champagne on the rooftop. If a concrete pillar cracked beneath the earth, my professional stamp was the one that would send me straight to a federal prison. I lived with that pressure every single day. My boss was Julian Vance, the director of project development. Julian was a textbook narcissist, a man whose greatest architectural achievement was the flawless, heavily gelled structure of his own hair. He was a master demagogue in the boardroom, capable of spinning empty corporate jargon into absolute gold. But he was completely hollow when it came to actual engineering logic. His real, hidden talent was quietly slicing the construction budgets, replacing premium-grade materials with cheap alternatives, and pocketing the massive difference for his own offshore accounts. The breaking point was the Azure Tower, a 60-story mega project meant to be the crown jewel of the Chicago riverfront. While running the final load simulations late one Friday night, I found a fatal flaw in the foundation matrix. Julian had bypassed my authority and authorized a supplier switch, replacing high-tensile steel rebar with a substandard, brittle grade to save millions of dollars. The math was blindingly clear and indisputable. If we built that foundation, the sheer weight of the upper floors would cause a catastrophic shear failure within 10 years. Thousands of innocent people would be crushed. I marched into his office the following Monday and firmly refused to sign off on the blueprints. Julian did not argue the physics. He knew he was caught. Instead, he called a sudden, mandatory meeting with the board of directors. We sat in a massive conference room walled entirely in glass, suspended 50 floors above the bustling city. I laid my thick reports on the polished mahogany table, ready to explain the impending disaster, but Julian struck first, executing a flawless, predatory maneuver. He did not address the steel or the foundation, he addressed me. He paced the room, his voice dripping with a sickly manufactured empathy that made my skin crawl. He told the board that the immense pressure of the mega project had completely broken me. He fabricated a compelling story that I was suffering from severe psychological breakdowns, hallucinating structural flaws due to extreme stress, and actively obstructing a billion-dollar timeline. Before I could even open my mouth to defend my own sanity, Julian looked me dead in the eye and fired me on the spot, citing gross insubordination and mental unfitness. I looked across the wide table, desperately seeking a lifeline. My fiancé, Preston, was sitting right there. Preston was the senior corporate legal counsel for Vanguard. We had been planning our lavish wedding for 18 months. I expected him to object, to demand a legal review of the documents, or at the very least, to look at me with some shred of solidarity. Instead, Preston stared intently at the perfectly polished tips of his expensive leather shoes. His jaw was clenched, but he remained absolutely silent. He calculated in that exact moment that speaking up would jeopardize his pending promotion to senior partner. He chose his comfortable future over my life and our relationship. A cold, quiet rage began to build deep in my chest. I pushed my heavy chair back and stood up, slamming my hands flat onto the table. I told Julian I would go straight to the City Building Commission and expose his entire fraudulent operation to the press. Julian smiled. It was a terrifying, utterly hollow smile. He walked slowly around the table, leaning in so close I could smell the sharp peppermint on his breath. He lowered his voice to a dark, menacing register so only I could hear. "Then go cry to your parents," he whispered. The words felt like a physical blade twisting violently in my stomach. 20 years ago. My mother and father were driving across a heavily trafficked suspension bridge when the main support cable snapped. They died instantly in the dark river below. It was a famous, highly publicized structural failure that drove me to become an engineer in the first place. Julian knew this intimate, devastating detail of my life, and he purposefully weaponized it to break my spirit. I stood completely frozen for exactly 3 seconds. I did not shed a single tear. I calmly picked up my briefcase, turned my back on the silent executives, and walked out of the glass cage. The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, every shred of loyalty I ever held for that company vanished into thin air, and the man who sat silently staring at his shoes. My love for Preston died completely, replaced by a singular, freezing focus on absolute, undeniable destruction. The descent took exactly 90 seconds, but it felt like descending into a grave. My hands gripped the edges of a cheap cardboard box containing 7 years of my life, a framed degree, a specialized calculator, a ceramic mug, and a few dying desk plants. The polished steel doors of the elevator slid open, spitting me out into the cavernous main lobby of the Vanguard building. The afternoon sun bled through the massive glass facade, casting long, harsh shadows across the cold Italian marble floor. My arms were trembling, not from sorrow, but from the toxic adrenaline crashing out of my system. As I shifted the weight of the box to my hip, a thick roll of structural blueprints slipped from under my arm. The heavy paper hit the marble with a hollow slap, unrolling slightly to reveal the complex geometry of a building that was destined to become a tomb. I knelt down, my knees hitting the hard floor, but before my fingers could reach the paper, a pair of worn, scuffed sneakers stepped into my line of sight. A hand covered in age spots and faded calluses gently scooped up the blueprint. It belonged to Clara. Everyone in the building knew Clara. Or rather, they looked right through her. She was the older woman in the faded canvas apron who ran the small, independent coffee cart, tucked away in the blind spot of the lobby. To the sleek executives marching past her every morning, she was nothing more than an appliance that dispensed caffeine. I reached out to take the roll, expecting a polite nod and a sympathetic smile. Instead, Clara held on to the blueprint. She looked down at me, and the kindly, tired glaze in her eyes was completely gone. Her gaze was as sharp and unyielding as cut flint. "Substandard, brittle-grade steel in the load-bearing columns," Clara said, her voice dropping an octave, losing the cheerful customer service lilt entirely. "And a 20% reduction in the concrete density for the sub-level foundation. A brilliant way to shave $50 million off the budget and funnel it directly into a Cayman Islands shell company." I froze, still kneeling on the marble. The lobby buzzed around us, businessmen and women walking rapidly past, completely oblivious to the impossible words coming out of the coffee vendor's mouth. "How do you know that?" I whispered, my heart slamming against my ribs. "Who are you?" Clara rolled the blueprint tightly and tapped it against her palm. "Stand up. Mila, brilliant women do not kneel on the floor for anyone." I stood up slowly, clutching my cardboard box. Clara tossed the blueprint into my box and wiped her hands on her stained apron. "Julian Vance is a predictable creature," she continued, her tone dry and analytical. "He steals just enough to feel powerful, but he is fundamentally lazy. He leaves digital fingerprints everywhere because he thinks he is the smartest man in the room. But I have been pouring his macchiatos for 6 months, and let me tell you, The man talks entirely too loudly on his phone when he thinks the help is not listening. Clara, this is insane. You cannot possibly know the foundation matrix. My name is Clara Sterling, she said simply. The air in my lungs vanished. Sterling, the Sterling family, they were old money. The invisible hands that shaped Chicago's skyline long before Vanguard even existed. They were legendary for their absolute privacy. You own the land, I breathed out, piecing the puzzle together. I own 60% of the silent equity in the Azure Tower, Clara corrected me, leaning against the polished wood of her coffee cart. I never trust a developer with my money without standing in their lobby first. You learn everything about a company's morality by how their executives treat the person pouring their coffee. Julian treats me like dirt. And you, Mila, always left a tip and asked about my day. More importantly, you are the only engineer in that glass cage who actually cares if the building collapses. She reached deep into the pocket of her faded jeans and pulled out a small, sleek device. It was an encrypted USB drive, heavy and cold. She pressed it firmly into my palm. I have the offshore bank records. I have his communications with the blacklisted suppliers, Clara said, her voice a low, commanding hum. But I need the internal system architecture. I need the backdoor access to Vanguard's servers to map his fraudulent invoices directly to your original, unaltered blueprints. I need the technical key to lock him in a cell forever. I stared at the small metal drive in my hand. The weight of it felt like a loaded weapon. What do you need me to do? I asked, my voice steadying. A slow, dangerous smile spread across the billionaire's weathered face. I need you to go home, put on your oldest pajamas, sit on the couch and look absolutely destroyed. When your cowardly fiancé walks through that door tonight, I want you to play the perfect, defeated victim. Men like them only make fatal mistakes when they believe they have completely won. Let them pop the champagne. Let them dig the hole. You and I are going to bury them in it. She turned back to her espresso machine, wiping down the steam wand with a rag, instantly transforming back into the invisible worker. I gripped the drive, adjusted the box in my arms, and walked out the heavy revolving glass doors into the Chicago wind, feeling a terrifying, glorious sense of purpose. I sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, drowning in the oversized gray sweatpants I usually reserved for the days I was battling a fever. The apartment was completely dark except for the amber glow of the streetlights slicing through the horizontal blinds. I had spent the last 4 hours perfecting the posture of a broken woman. My hair was disheveled, my shoulders hunched, and I stared blankly at the blank television screen. The front door clicked open at exactly 8 o'clock in the evening. Preston walked in, carefully hanging his tailored suit jacket on the oak rack. He did not rush to my side to comfort me. He did not ask if I was all right. Instead, he walked straight to the mahogany liquor cabinet and poured himself 2 fingers of expensive bourbon. The clinking of the ice against the crystal glass sounded like a judge striking a gavel. He finally turned to me, leaning against the kitchen island with an air of practiced, paternal exhaustion. Mila, sweetheart, he sighed, taking a slow sip. You caused quite a scene today. You really backed Julian into a corner. I looked up at him, forcing my eyes to wide, watery pools of disbelief. He fired me. Preston, he is going to build a structure that will collapse, and you sat there. You did not say a single word. Preston set his glass down and walked over. Crouching in front of me, he took my cold hands in his. His palms were perfectly dry. I stayed quiet to protect us, he said softly, deploying his smoothest courtroom voice. If I had spoken up, I would have been terminated too. Then who pays the mortgage? Who pays for the wedding caterers in September? Julian is just under a lot of pressure from the board. You were being rigid. Mila, you let your anxiety get the better of you. The gaslighting was seamless. He was actually trying to convince me that my mathematical certainty was just female hysteria. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope, placing a pen on top of it. I went to bat for you, Preston continued, his voice dripping with condescension. I spent 2 hours negotiating with human resources. I got them to agree to a severance package. $25,000. It is a gesture of goodwill. All you have to do is sign this non-disclosure agreement. You agree not to disparage Vanguard or discuss the Azure Tower blueprints with anyone. We take the money. You take a few months off to rest your mind, and we focus on our future. $25,000. It was an absolute insult. A pathetic bribe to buy my silence regarding a billion-dollar catastrophe. He wanted me to sell my soul for the price of a mid-range sedan. I looked at the pen, then up at his impeccably handsome, entirely empty face. I forced my hand to tremble as I reached out and touched the paper. "I cannot look at this right now," I whispered, pulling my hand back. "Let me sleep on it, please." Preston patted my knee, looking incredibly satisfied with himself. "Of course. Take your time. You are just emotional right now. Tomorrow, you will see I am right." He kissed my forehead, a dry, meaningless gesture, and went to take a shower. I stayed on the couch, my blood running colder than the Chicago winter outside. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the apartment was dead silent. A heavy, rhythmic snoring came from the master bedroom. I slipped out from under the down comforter, grabbed my silver laptop from the study, and locked myself inside the guest bathroom. I sat on the cold tile floor, resting the computer on my knees. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the heavy encrypted drive Clara had given me, and pushed it into the port. A black command terminal popped up on the screen. It was time to open the door. 3 years ago, I realized the company servers were too slow to render my massive stress test simulations. So, purely for efficiency, I built a hidden backdoor into the three-dimensional architectural software, a private tunnel that bypassed the corporate firewall entirely. I typed in a string of complex code, hitting enter. The screen flashed green. I was in. I immediately linked Clara's decryption software to the Vanguard financial directory. Within 5 minutes, the screen began flooding with thousands of hidden files. I downloaded the shadow ledgers, the fake invoice receipts, and the communication logs between Julian and the blacklisted Chinese steel manufacturers. The evidence of embezzlement was absolute. Julian was funneling roughly 30% of the total material budget into a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. But as the progress bar inched toward 100%, my eyes caught a peculiar file path buried in the legal department's subfolder. The file name was simply Azure Tower Sublevel Foundation Matrix Final. My stomach tightened. I double-clicked the document. It was the exact structural blueprint I had refused to sign that morning, the one with the fatal flaws. But as I scrolled to the bottom of the digital document, my heart stopped completely. The breath was violently knocked out of my lungs. There, at the bottom right corner, was an electronic signature. Mila Coleman, lead structural engineer. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. The timestamp next to my forged signature read 4:15 in the afternoon. That was exactly 2 hours after Julian had fired me, and long after my access badge had been deactivated. Someone had accessed the system and signed the death warrant in my name. I pulled up the network routing history to find the source of the digital stamp. The code traced back to an administrative terminal on the 50th floor. It traced back to an internal authorization token. The token belonged to Preston. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. Preston was not just a coward who stayed quiet to protect his promotion. He was a direct, active accomplice. He had used his high-level legal credentials to log in and forge my digital signature on the compromised blueprints. The brilliance of their pure evil washed over me. If the building stood, Julian and Preston would become incredibly wealthy and powerful. But if the foundation sheared, if the tower collapsed in 10 years and killed thousands of people, Julian would not take the fall. Preston would not be disbarred. They had created the perfect paper trail. The federal investigators would look at the documents and see that the mentally unstable, recently fired engineer had officially signed off on the exact structural failure that brought the building down. Preston did not just want me to sign a non-disclosure agreement to keep me quiet. He was grooming me to be his personal scapegoat. He was planning to send the woman he supposedly loved to a federal penitentiary for the rest of her life. Sitting on the cold bathroom floor, the final piece of my humanity clicked off like a light switch. There was no more pain. There was no more heartbreak. There was only the icy, razor-sharp clarity of an executioner preparing the block. The next morning, the thick silence of the apartment was shattered by the frantic buzzing of Preston's cell phone. I was sitting at the kitchen island, calmly sipping a cup of black coffee, watching him unravel. He burst out of the bedroom, his hair uncombed, desperately trying to tie his silk necktie with trembling hands. His usually perfect composure had completely evaporated. "It is a disaster," Preston gasped, pacing across the hardwood floor. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation just walked into the Vanguard lobby. They are freezing the physical servers. They have a warrant for a random compliance audit triggered by an anonymous tip from some shadow investor. We are entirely locked out of our own network." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. "That sounds incredibly stressful. Preston." His phone buzzed again and again. Julian was in a state of absolute panic. From my laptop resting innocently on the counter, I was actively monitoring the internal communications traffic, because I still had my hidden backdoor channel open, and because Julian was using the company's emergency encrypted messaging app to reach Preston. I was intercepting every single text in real time. Julian was ordering his legal counsel to immediately wipe all external hard drives and burn the physical supplier manifests. I did not just read the messages. I automatically forwarded the entire data stream straight to Clara Sterling's private, secure server. Every frantic instruction to destroy evidence was just another nail in their collective coffin. Preston threw his phone onto the couch, breathing heavily. He looked at me, his eyes darting frantically. He walked over and suddenly dropped to both knees on the kitchen floor. He grabbed my waist, burying his face in my lap like a terrified child. "Mila, I need you to save me," he pleaded, his voice cracking. The great corporate loyal lawyer was practically sobbing. "Julian is trying to pin the foundation matrix on me because I was the one who processed the final paperwork. But the signature on the file is yours. Mila, they are going to see your digital stamp. If you just take the fall for it, if you just admit it was a minor technical negligence on your part due to your mental breakdown, I can keep you out of prison." The sheer audacity of his lie was almost breathtaking. He had forged my signature, and now he was begging me to confess to his crime. "I will hire the best defense attorneys in the entire state of Illinois," Preston continued, squeezing my hand so tightly it hurt. "I will pay for everything. You might get probation, maybe a small fine, but you will not serve a single day behind bars. If I go down, we lose everything. We lose the house. We lose the future. Please, Mila, I love you so much. Do this for us." I looked down at the man I had planned to marry. Bile rose in the back of my throat, but I swallowed it down. I commanded my eyes to fill with tears. I let my bottom lip quiver. I let out a jagged, pathetic sob, playing the role of the weak, desperately devoted woman to absolute perfection. "Okay," I whispered, my voice shaking with perfectly manufactured fear. "Okay. Preston, I will do it. I will protect you. I cannot let them take you away." He exhaled a massive sigh of relief, leaning up to kiss my cheek. "Thank you. Oh God. Thank you, Mila. I knew you would understand." He did not notice the heavy, black resin button on my wool cardigan. It was slightly larger than the others. Clara had given it to me the day before, securely fastened to the fabric. It was a military-grade micro voice recorder. It was picking up every single syllable of Preston's pathetic begging, capturing his crystal-clear admission that he knew about the digital stamp and his active attempt to coerce me into covering up a federal crime. Preston scrambled to his feet, suddenly energized by the belief that he had successfully manipulated me into jumping onto his grenade. "We need to get the non-disclosure agreement signed immediately," he said, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Once you sign it, I can legally represent you and shield your communications from the federal agents." "I cannot sign it here," I sobbed quietly, wiping a fake tear from my cheek. "I need to feel like we are together in this. I want to bring it to you tonight, At the groundbreaking gala for the Azure Tower, let me see the project one last time. Let me stand by your side, and I will sign the papers right there in front of Julian so he knows I'm taking the blame. Preston's eyes lit up with predatory relief, having me sign the confession in person, right as they celebrated their fraudulent triumph, was too poetic for his ego to resist. It would allow him and Julian to drink their champagne with zero anxiety. Yes, Preston said quickly, straightening his jacket. Yes, that is perfect. Come to the gala tonight at 8 o'clock. Wear the red dress. We will handle the paperwork in the private lounge, and then we will celebrate our future. He grabbed his briefcase and rushed out the door to go manage the federal agents. The moment the lock clicked, my tears instantly dried. I unfastened the top button of my cardigan, pressed the tiny stop mechanism, and smiled. I had the confession, I had the data, I had the exact time and place for their execution. All that was left was to put on a beautiful dress and light the match. The site of the future Azure Tower had been transformed into a temporary palace of blinding hypocrisy. A massive pavilion constructed entirely of reinforced, clear acrylic stood right on the edge of the Chicago River. Inside, the groundbreaking gala was a suffocating sea of wealth and manufactured influence. The room was packed with state senators, city commissioners, and the ultra-wealthy elite of the Midwest. Crystal chandeliers, rented for thousands of dollars a night, hung from the temporary ceiling, casting a harsh, sparkling light over the designer suits and silk dresses. Waiters in stark white tuxedos navigated the dense crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with imported caviar and flutes of vintage champagne. Every major news network in the city had set up their heavy cameras at the back of the room, broadcasting the triumph of Vanguard Pinnacle Developments live to the evening audience. At the absolute center of this opulent circus stood Julian Vance. He was positioned behind a sleek acrylic podium, bathed in the bright glare of the television spotlights. He looked perfectly at home, grinning with the effortless charm of a natural-born predator. As he spoke into the microphone, his voice was smooth, projecting a sickening illusion of corporate nobility. He spoke eloquently about unyielding architectural integrity, about creating a legacy that would stand for 100 years, and about his deep, personal commitment to public safety. The sheer audacity of his lies made the air feel incredibly thin. Standing just off to the right side of the main stage, partially hidden by a towering floral arrangement, was Preston. He clutched a thick black leather folder tightly against his chest. Inside that folder was the non-disclosure agreement, the legal trap designed to bury me forever. He kept checking his expensive gold wristwatch, shifting his weight nervously from foot to foot, waiting for his broken fiancée to arrive and surrender her life. They expected a shattered, tearful woman hiding behind dark makeup. They expected a victim. When I finally stepped through the heavy pavilion doors at exactly 8:30 in the evening, I did not just walk into the room. I parted the ocean of guests. I wore a floor-length, dark crimson evening gown that commanded immediate, absolute attention. My spine was perfectly straight, my shoulders pulled back, and my heels clicked sharply against the temporary wooden floorboards with the rhythm of a marching executioner. The red silk trailed behind me like spilled blood. I moved through the elite crowd with a terrifying, icy grace. The murmurs of the politicians died down as I passed. They did not know who I was, but they could feel the heavy shift in the atmosphere. Preston saw me first. The color instantly drained from his handsome face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. He nudged Julian, who briefly stopped his grand speech to look in my direction. Julian covered his shock quickly, his polished smile returning as he waved me up the carpeted steps to the stage. He expertly played it off for the rolling cameras, gesturing to me as if I were a beloved member of his triumphant team. I climbed the stairs and stood right beside him in the blinding spotlight. Julian leaned in tight, wrapping his arm around my waist for the photographers. To the audience, it looked like a celebratory embrace, but his fingers dug brutally hard into my ribs, and his voice was a venomous, hushed whisper right next to my ear. "You look absolutely desperate, Mila," he hissed, his smile never wavering for the flashing cameras. "Sign the paper right now, in front of all these important people. Prove you know exactly how to obey, or I will make sure the federal agents arrest you before you even leave this tent." Preston stepped forward instantly, his hands shaking slightly as he flipped open the leather folder and presented the legal document. He handed me a heavy gold fountain pen. The entire room seemed to quiet down. The collective gaze of the city's most powerful people locked onto us. They thought they were witnessing a ceremonial signing of a building contract. They had no idea they were watching a hostage situation. I took the gold pen from Preston. I looked down at the paper, at the designated signature line that would legally bind me to their catastrophic fraud. I lowered the pen. The sharp metallic nib stopped exactly 2 millimeters above the thick white paper. I held it there, perfectly suspended. I did not move a single muscle. 10 seconds passed. The silence in the pavilion grew heavy, almost suffocating. Julian's fake smile began to strain at the edges. Preston swallowed hard, a drop of cold sweat rolling down the side of his neck. "Sign it," Julian whispered, the panic finally bleeding into his tone. "Sign it right now." I did not sign it, because at that exact moment, the heavy velvet curtains at the side of the stage were violently ripped open. The polite murmurs of the crowd instantly transformed into a chorus of shocked gasps. Walking out from the shadows was not the invisible, shabby coffee vendor in a stained canvas apron. It was Clara Sterling. She was wearing a sharply tailored, charcoal gray designer power suit. Her white hair swept back with intimidating elegance. She was flanked by 4 massive private security contractors who looked ready to dismantle a tank. The pure, terrifying aura of old, untouchable money radiated from her every step. Julian's face completely froze. The smug arrogance vanished from his eyes, replaced by total, uncomprehending shock. He recognized the woman who poured his daily espresso, but his brain simply could not process why she was storming his billionaire gala with a heavily armed detail. Clara did not look at him. She marched straight up to the center podium, her expensive leather shoes echoing loudly. She reached out and physically ripped the microphone directly from Julian's stiff hand. She looked out over the sea of politicians, the flashing news cameras, and the terrified executives. "My name is Clara Sterling," her voice thundered through the massive speakers, completely dominating the room. "I hold 60% of the silent equity in this dirt you are standing on, and as the true owner of this project, I am here to tell you that this party is officially over." I opened my fingers. The heavy gold fountain pen slipped from my grasp, hitting the wooden stage with a sharp, echoing clatter. I reached into the pocket of my crimson gown, pulled out my smartphone, and pressed a single, pre-programmed command. Behind us, the towering LED wall that spanned the entire back of the stage abruptly cut to black. The majestic promotional video of the Azure Tower vanished. A loud surge of static hissed through the massive pavilion speakers. Then, the screen illuminated again. This time, it displayed crystal clear. 50-foot wide projections of Julian's offshore banking ledgers, the fake invoices, the routing numbers to the Cayman Islands. Before anyone could even process the massive numbers glowing above them, a voice echoed through the pavilion. It was Preston's voice, recorded just 12 hours prior, amplified perfectly through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Julian is trying to pin the foundation matrix on me because I was the one who processed the final paperwork. But the signature on the file is yours, Mila. They are going to see your digital stamp. If you just take the fall for it, if you just admit it was a minor technical negligence on your part, I can keep you out of prison." The silence that followed the recording lasted exactly 1 second before the entire pavilion violently imploded. Hundreds of camera flashes erupted like a lightning storm. Reporters began shouting wildly into their microphones. State senators and wealthy investors scrambled toward the exits, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive center of the room. Julian Vance's eyes bulged from his skull. His face turned a horrifying shade of purple. He lunged frantically toward the side of the stage, screaming at the audio technicians to cut the main power lines. He never made it to the cables. A dozen federal agents wearing dark jackets stormed the acrylic pavilion from every single exit. They moved with terrifying speed, swarming the stage and pinning Julian's arms behind his back. The lead agent forcefully read him his Miranda rights over the deafening chaos, loudly citing massive federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and severe public endangerment. Julian thrashed and spit, his perfect hair falling wildly into his face, transforming from a corporate god into a pathetic, caged animal in a matter of seconds. I turned my head away from the arrest and looked down. Preston had collapsed onto his knees, perfectly recreating his pathetic performance from my kitchen floor. All the color had drained from his face. He was visibly hyperventilating, his hands violently shaking as he reached up, desperately trying to grab the silk fabric of my dress. "Mila, please," he choked out, tears streaming down his face. "Please, you have to tell them I did not mean it. You have to save me." I looked at the man I had almost tied my entire life to. There was absolutely nothing left inside me for him. No anger, no pity, just a cold, sterile void. I raised my left hand, took hold of the heavy diamond engagement ring he had given me, and pulled it off my finger. I did not place it in his palm. I threw the ring squarely into his chest. It bounced off his expensive tie and rolled away across the wooden floorboards. "I am not your scapegoat, Preston," I said, my voice completely dead. "You built a foundation on lies, and now it is crushing you." Two federal agents grabbed Preston by his shoulders, hauling him roughly to his feet. As they marched him away, I walked slowly to the edge of the stage. Julian was being dragged down the carpeted stairs, his wrists securely locked in heavy steel handcuffs. He was cursing uncontrollably, kicking at the cameras that were broadcasting his utter humiliation to the entire country. I stepped directly into his path. The agents paused for a brief second. Julian looked up at me, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with pure, unadulterated hatred. I leaned in close, until the scent of his sharp peppermint breath was overwhelmed by the smell of his cold sweat. I looked deeply into the eyes of the man who had tried to destroy my career, my freedom, and my sanity. A slow, incredibly sharp smile spread across my face. "Now," I whispered quietly, "go cry to your parents." Julian let out an agonizing scream of fury, but the agents forcefully shoved him forward, dragging him out into the cold Chicago night. Exactly 30 days later, the empire officially crumbled. The federal judge showed absolutely no mercy. Julian Vance was sentenced to 20 years in a maximum security penitentiary for his crimes. Preston lost his entire world. The State Bar Association permanently revoked his legal license. He was completely disbarred, sitting in a miserable county holding cell, anxiously waiting for his own criminal trial to begin. As for me, the view from the 50th floor is entirely different when you are the one holding the keys. I sat behind a massive oak desk in the highest glass corner office of the Vanguard building. Clara Sterling had officially restructured the entire corporation and appointed me as the new general manager of project development. The sun poured in through the massive windows, warming the thick architectural paper spread across my drafting table. I picked up a silver pen, uncapped it, and began to draw. I was designing a brand new foundation matrix from scratch, one built on solid steel, flawless mathematics, and undeniable truth, a structure that absolutely no one could ever tear down. Thank you so much, dear listeners, for staying with me until the very end of this journey. I would love to know where you are listening from today, so please let me know your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's story satisfying and want to help our channel survive, please consider supporting us with just $1. Your small contribution allows us to pay our incredibly hard-working staff, helping them feed their families and continue creating these powerful stories for you. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the direct PayPal link in the video description and the pinned comment. Thank you again. Take care of yourselves, and remember that karma never misses a deadline.